Outreach Program and the mother of two boys who graduated from the Fairfax County school system, I just want to thank you for inviting us to present at this important Heritage Month event. I'm happy also to be here today to introduce NAWA, the National Arab American Women Association, and to talk about the important work that NAWA does for the Arab American community in particular and the American community in general. We are a membership-based grassroots organization of Arab American women. We serve as a platform to support our community members and to connect and collaborate with other like-minded organizations advocating for social justice. Our focus is addressing issues that directly impact the Arab American community while also bringing awareness of our rich culture and heritage to the broader community. One of NAWA's main programs is the Education Outreach Committee program. The program was initiated as a response to the plethora of misrepresentations, misconceptions, and negative stereotypes about Arabs that are propagated in the educational system, mainstream media, and general society. We decided to focus our attention on the educational system to ensure that accurate information and teaching in formative years would pay off in better informed future generation. Our mission is to advocate for and promote accurate, anti-biased, diverse representation of Arabs and Arab Americans in the American education system. Our goal is to provide resources and expertise to assist teachers and educators in doing so. We also aspire to collaborate with other misrepresented communities in accomplishing our collective goals. In doing so, we do hope to engender an inclusive society for Arab Americans and other marginalized communities. Thank you.
All right, so now we go into who are Arab Americans. As you see on the slide, there are 22 Arab countries that share language and traditions and a cuisine. They also represent diverse cultures, religions, ethnicities, and histories. For example, I identify as Arab, Armenian, Palestinian, and culturally Christian. There are 3.7 million Arab Americans across the United States today that represent a diverse group of people from the Middle East and North Africa. And of course, we do not speak for all of them. We're that diverse, just like everyone else in the US as well. From the late 1980s until the mid-1920s, Middle East and North Africa, or what we refer to as MENA immigrants arriving in the US, consisted primarily of Arab Christians from Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. And like many immigrant groups, they were fleeing political turmoil and pursuing economic opportunities in the US. The displacement of 750,000 Palestinians from their homeland in 1948, along with revolutions in Egypt and Iraq in the 1950s, triggered the second wave of MENA migration. In part as a result of restrictive US quota systems, immigrants arriving during this period were highly educated elites. Post-1965, arrivals consisted of a wider mix of people seeking family unification, education, and employment opportunities, and safety from war and persecution. MENA immigrants during this time had similarly high education levels, and they were also mostly Muslim. Since 2010, humanitarian migration from war-torn countries in the region like Syria and Yemen, as well as ongoing family reunification, has driven the MENA immigration to the US. Next slide, please. So the MENA region has been impacted by colonization, competing foreign interests, military intervention by international superpowers, and political upheaval, which I'm sure you're exposed to as well through the media. The US political interests in the region, including unconditional military support to Israel, has contributed to media bias and reporting misconception of Arab Americans, particularly Palestinians and Muslims. When I watch the TV sometimes, I honestly cringe, and I feel like this is not how my community is. It's not represented correctly. Because educators get their information from the media as a reliable source, implicit and explicit bias of educators can create a hostile environment for students in the classroom if they are perceived as Arab or Muslim or both. Sometimes children feel unsafe and invisible in their classrooms. For example, I'm a parent of 2 girls, and since we've arrived, one of the examples of misinformation that my older daughter has been exposed to on multiple occasions is the referral to Jerusalem as a city in Israel, which actually under international law, East Jerusalem is occupied. And as a Palestinian from Jerusalem, she felt invisible in the classroom. After 9/11, Arab Americans experienced escalation in bias and aggression against them, including the targeting of Muslims and Islamophobic policies like the Muslim ban, for example. Not only have Arab Americans experienced increased discrimination over the past years, but they also experience erasure because the US Census does not contain an ethnic category, which is MENA, Middle East and North Africa, that accurately captures Arab ancestry. Arabs have to identify as white on the census, and this does not really reflect accurately their racial and ethnic identities. The MENA community, like others, relies on accurate census representation for health research, language assistance, civil rights laws, and reporting educational outcomes, which right now is not an option. Like other communities that make up the diverse fabric of the United States, we need representation, in the census, in schools, in the classrooms, and in the curriculum. That's okay, I know it. So we're here to talk about 2 issues mainly. One is to inform people about who are the Arab Americans. And living in Falls Church myself, I live off West Street. I know that Falls Church community, the city of Falls Church, the schools in Falls Church know who Arab Americans are. And they know some Arab Americans, maybe some Muslim Americans, maybe some Christian Arab Americans, and so forth. The issue that we're trying, which is the second issue we're here for, is that it's not only that we know and we don't know and we have misconception. What we are facing are misrepresentation of Arab Americans in our curriculum, in our media, and I can start counting the endless, incidents and examples of that. What NAWA does is focus on the education aspects of that. In addition to that, we have other programs encouraging businesswomen who are, of Arab origin, starting their own businesses, empowerment. And we also have the advocacy group that works on issues where we see misrepresentation. So how many of you watch the videos and the movies, Hollywood movies, where you have this big fat Arab guy sitting and with belly dancers around him and eating, and maybe there is a camel outside his tent, and maybe there's this Rambo coming to save the belly dancer who, how many of those movies we've seen? I think this is enough, and that's what NAWA is trying to do. One other example where we see misrepresentation is really the textbooks, but I'll give that example shortly. So what we're trying to say here, we're arguing, I serve on the advisory committee of the state on culture responsive, and Jennifer is there too. We're about 50 people advising the state on the standards of the SOL, standards of learning, the framework of that standard. And we're trying to really push for changes because we all see the misrepresentation of lots of marginalized groups. So we're not just talking about being Arab Americans and our misrepresentation, we're trying to look for allies. We're trying to look for people who are like-minded to make it that our textbooks, our media, our social media, we use platforms in school systems are really equitable, but also not biased and misrepresenting who we are. So I think this is the duty of any teacher who wants to practice and engage in culture responsive practice,
to really take that into consideration, and to know that there are children in your community, and to know that sometimes they're even afraid to say who they are. They're afraid to say that they're Arabs, and when it has to do with Palestinians, they're even more afraid to say they're Palestinians. And we can, you know, we've been collecting stories from parents, like the story that Aline just talked about. We're collecting these stories to prove and to show that our kids are not feeling comfortable. But what we're doing really, we're not preparing all children, all of Falls Church children, all of Fairfax County children, we're not preparing them for the global world. We're not preparing them to dispute and to critically think about what's going on around them. And that's why we think that talking about the misrepresentation, talking about the Arab American community and getting to know that community is what cultural responsive practice mean. Again, we're not just saying, hey, we're the Arab Americans, please include us. We are already included in the fabric of the Arab American community. We have famous people, we have celebrities, and we really don't want to focus on that as now.
We treat
you can go online and check who are the celebrities that are from, you know, Diane Reem and all these other people, Paula Abdul, and you know, we're talking about the real people, the children in your classrooms and the children in our communities.
No, that's why.
And that's why we think that it's the duty of every teacher to really, every educator, to think about what we're teaching when it has to do with Arab Americans. Very simply to look at media sources and see what are the sources that are accurate and what are the sources that are bringing the multiple viewpoints to the students, to the learners. I want to just give one example of what we've been doing with the textbooks. And I'm just giving one example. Honestly, if you don't mind, yeah. Honestly, we have looked at books, history books, social studies books from Maryland. We looked at those in Loudoun County. We looked at those in Fairfax County. And we have been working with Fairfax County. We have been working on the state level. I have been really looking at the high school textbooks in social studies, world history, and others to show some examples where we are, you know, the discourse is there. The misrepresentation discourse is so embedded and so subtle that we feel like it's our job as educators to bring it to your attention as educators. For example, if you don't mind, I don't memorize this statement about Al-Qaeda, but all right. So what do you think is wrong with this? And I know we have a Zoom audience. Sorry, we can't engage you, but what's wrong with this statement? Honey, you can guess, it's okay. Nothing wrong? No, please. Yes, yes. And this might be like in one of these textbooks where it's like hidden somewhere and very blank statement. And a lot of, I work with international educators and I see curriculum in different countries. And you would see like people think that the American textbook and the curriculum is very shallow. We go very widely. We don't go in depth. Yes, but there are things we can do right now. For example, not make such a blank statement about 9/11. It's a horrific, tragic event. Arabs and Muslims were killed in that event, so we cannot blame Arabs for that. So we're suggesting, along with other groups, some rewarding, if you don't mind sharing that. Do you see the difference? We're not only not misrepresenting Arabs, we're also telling our students, our learners, that there is this group that we need to be aware of named Al-Qaeda that has been doing these events in the name of Arabs. That's what our students deserve. That's what all students deserve. And we have tons of other examples that we can provide you with to show that textbooks, curriculum, media, all of these tools available for educators are there for us. We share the resources also with Jennifer. So I think the point is probably pretty clear by now. Use that. think about what you're offering your students. And if you have doubts, explore and ask questions. We also have these examples I just mentioned, and we're happy to provide some more. Okay, what's next? Sorry. That's you? Me? So how do we support our students? I've already probably touched upon this. I have a student, I'm telling you a story here. I worked at George Mason for many years as a teacher educator, and I had a student who was teaching in student teaching in one of the areas around here, one of the schools. And she came to school and she said, I just met this kindergartner who was fasting for Ramadan. I don't really know, Professor Nasser, how can she be fasting 24 hours a day? I'm looking at her, I'm like, what? Who said she fasts 24 hours a day? And she said, yeah, that's what she told me. And I said, did you look into why people fast? What is this Ramadan all about? It takes a minute. Information is available. It's not that it's not there. So don't assume. Investigate and look into it. So I directed her to look into the question. And even if it's true, it's our job as educators to say something. If this is practice that we see and we don't think that it's appropriate for the age. That's another important aspect of our work with NAWA, is that we're trying to also say, ask questions, get to know the community, but also, you can have red flags. Nobody is saying accept everything because that's cultural responsive. I think you can talk more about what's cultural responsive practice from what we've been doing and how, sounds simple, but it's hard to implement. The second point is that, if there is something going on, and I've seen that too, don't single out your Arab students. If you're watching the news right now, what's happening in Gaza and the bombing that's happening in Gaza, and you have a student who's Palestinian, or maybe we think is Palestinian, or we ask, so what's going on there? It's not just us who say it's complicated. The kids don't always have the answer because sometimes they don't know, right? And if they know, they might be put on the spot. So we're saying, please don't put the students on the spot. Acknowledge, the holidays, like Aline just presented, the Arabs come from 22 countries. We're talking about, 350 million Arabs who claim to be Arabs, some more Arabs than others, but I won't get into that. And so we cannot assume that they all celebrate the same holidays. We cannot assume they all have the same traditions. It can differ from country to country. So get to know that. Make sure that when you have assignments, create assignments, make sure that you include the Arab Americans community, the ones represented in your classroom there. And then make sure that your class is welcoming. And I want to give another example. I don't know how I'm doing with time, but my last example is that I also had a teacher who was very enthusiastic about meeting all the different cultures in her classroom, addressing everyone, celebrating everyone. And she assumed that one of her Vietnamese families would actually welcome a Vietnamese dinner for her students. She didn't ask the parents about that. And when the parents knew, they got very upset. They felt that they were singled out without being asked. Same with Arab Americans. Before you assume you know everything about sweets and food and falafels and knafe and all of this, make sure that your parents are on board with that. So creating this welcoming environment, not just for the kids, but their families. And again, we have supplementary materials. I know that teachers, educators are very busy and they are quickly going in and out the classroom, but we provided a nice list of resources that could be used with different areas that we could explore. And I think Aline can say the last one. Yes.
Oh, Aline, you want to talk about?
No, sorry, Lara.
I think the next slide, and you talked to this, right?
I think this speaks for itself. I think he gave me a sign that we have 2 minutes.
Okay. So all right. Well, so before we wrap up, I'll just do this quickly. I just want to make sure, I think Ilham alluded to most of this, but As the education committee program, the things we can provide is we do have materials on Arab Americans, novels, nonfiction. Please check our resources on our website. We're happy to come talk to teachers, students. We are a group of women from different countries, different religious backgrounds, and we're happy to share experiences. We also have done a lot of workshops, webinars. We have experienced educators and they can do so. We also, as Ilham mentioned, we participated in reviewing social studies textbooks and you know how they portray Arabs and Muslims. We're happy to share this with you. Our website is nawa.org. Please reach out. general@nawa.org is our email, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for a question or two? Sure. Thank you so much.
My privilege to welcome our second presenter this afternoon.
Ms. Elise Ho is the founder of Feed It Forward DC and a graduate of George Mason University. And she is representing Asian American Pacific Islander heritage. But before she comes up, I just wanted to say we had a little connection. And she is a proud graduate of Fairfax High School, where I served as superintendent before coming to the City of Falls Church. And she recognized me and introduced herself. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Elise Ho.
Hi, everyone. Wow, that was amazing, by the way. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Elise Ho. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm the director of Feed It Forward DC, which is a small nonprofit in the DC area. So my presentation is not as historical, factual, or anything like that. So I'm going to share my personal experience of how I grew up, my culture, and how Feed It Forward DC got started. So I was originally born in France, and I moved to the United States when I was 10 years old. I spoke no English. I learned from living with my cousins. I would say that I didn't really grow up in a traditional Asian American household. We didn't really have any parental figures to watch over us, so we kind of raised each other. I graduated from George Mason University as the first person in my family to graduate college. After college is really when well, first I grew up watching my mom working 3 jobs, and she was kind of a TV radio host in the Vietnamese community. So she was always doing nonprofit charitable events and always kind of like making me go with her. And I used to drag my feet and always I hated it because it was just, you know, as a kid, you didn't really enjoy any of that community work, I guess. So, but then growing up, I realized how fortunate it was that she was doing that work because it was really selfless and giving back to her community. She worked with a lot of immigrants and refugees, especially people who didn't speak English, do their taxes or file for their citizenship, green card, things of that nature. So how Feed It Forward started was I actually volunteered one year at a Jewish center on Christmas. I wasn't able to be with my family for Christmas Day, so one of my friends invited me to volunteer. I had no expectations on what this meant. We showed up and the plan was to give gifts and sing carols to elderly folks who lived in a long-term care facility. By no means do I sing or any of that. So it was really uncomfortable and but I just went with it. So we spent all day like knocking on doors, singing, delivering, kind of sharing like 20 minutes with them because they didn't have any relatives around or family or anything like that. So at the end of the day, we got in a circle and we all shared like what was our favorite part, like who made you laugh the most. We prayed, and then we cried together, which was like a really intimate moment of like, and you're with strangers also, by the way. I only knew one person. So it was that moment where I realized, everyone in this circle came from different backgrounds and cultures and all walks of life. And we all could share this moment together of giving back and doing something selfless. So I wanted to recreate that experience, which is why Feed It Forward DC was created. So our mission is really to promote social responsibility, but in a fun way, which means, not the typical, oh, I'm gonna go volunteer at a food bank, or which that stuff is important too, but really trying to get more people involved and have families come and bring their children and show them what it means to really connect with somebody who is receiving what you're donating. We started doing bag lunches once a month, and then we kind of catered our monthly event to what was going on at the time. So having like families around, and a lot of our, like my Asian American community, help me promote, and that was really a huge thing. And then I think like my mom even came out to volunteer once, and she was like, she doesn't speak that great of English, so just seeing her like connecting with other people and all their cultures, that really, I think helped her kind of realize like, oh, we are all Americans at the end of the day. We might not have different skin color, but we're all people. So the more, it's been like 5 years now. So at first it was, everything came out of our own pockets. By the way, starting a nonprofit is really difficult. It's not, it's not easy. So everything came out of our own pockets. And now we're able to fundraise a lot more. We've been able to work with like the Wizards, the Washington team, a lot of like local restaurants, businesses and things like that. And it's nice to see every like culture kind of come together to help other people that are less fortunate than us. And growing up, I remember trying to survive versus and not having resources. And now I think it's important to as you get older to kind of give back, and like she said, educate people on what it means, like not just your culture, but like we're all people at the end of the day. So that's kind of how my bringing up was. But I think like the experiences of personal struggle, economic distribution, like racial harassment, discriminatory legislation, it sucks that it has to be those things like in the media, especially the last year, kind of bringing all of this up and kind of waking up people, getting them aware of what's really going on, even in Arab American culture, Jewish culture, Asian Americans, as like hate crimes are more, in the media, but really it's been happening for a long time. So I think it's nice to have these type of events to kind of bring the awareness in something positive, which is pretty much what Feed It Forward DC is. So I hope like as one of our main mission though is to have people, especially schools and kids, realize that you need like community service hours. So why not doing it in a fun way, or why not go to an event where you're actually having fun and it's not a chore, which is what Feed It Forward DC is. So I hope you guys could, help kind of push the younger generation to volunteer more and spend their time, only because it's something outside of themselves. They're really giving back, and it's really making an impact, especially on the youth. We've been trying to refocus on working with children more, because we do see a direct impact. When you have those conversations, it's something that's everlasting. Like they're always going to remember when someone gave them a pair of shoes that they really wanted or they couldn't afford. Also, I was telling her that during this time, it's been hard for children to, because they don't have their friends around. So kind of, they don't have any reason to go buy back to school supplies, or they don't, have the resources. A lot of these families have been like relocated from their homes and they live in hotels trying to learn, and it's been really tough for them. So kind of like doing these types of events that are, now that, COVID is, we're moving along, we're able to do more of those this year. So I really hope you take the opportunity to volunteer, bring your families, your students, and all that. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much. And our last speaker, representing Jewish American Heritage Month, is Rabbi Romano, who is the Religious Schools Director from Bethel Hebrew Congregation in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's definitely like a little nap time-esque. So I'm hoping to get our blood moving just a little bit. It'll be a little interactive, but mostly fun. So hi, I am Rabbi Bailey Romano. I am the Director of Education at Bethel Hebrew Congregation, and I am excited to have a conversation with you and to share a little bit about American Jewish culture and how you can integrate it into your classrooms, and also some important things similar to our previous speakers to take into consideration when you think about what you're teaching, how you're teaching it, and your audience with your students. So next slide, please. All right, so one of the things that you may not actually know is that Jews have been in America since 1654. We've been here for a long time, and actually our first sort of wave of immigration were Sephardic Jews who had experienced persecution from the Spanish Inquisition, who had moved to Amsterdam and England, and then came over to the new colonies. So Jews have been a huge part, actually, of establishing the United States as the colonies, and then going forward. So this picture at the very bottom, you see Chaim Solomon. So Chaim Solomon was a Sephardic Jew who actually financed part of the revolution. There were Jews on either side, loyalists and colonialists, not colonialists, colonists. But he actually gave most of his money and lost most of his money. He was dedicated to his country. And you see this across the board with American Jews. Even before that, though, Jews were the first minority group in New Amsterdam and in New York. And they actually had to argue and advocate for themselves to have religious freedom. At the time, you had to serve in certain capacities as officers or to be a part of the watch. And to be a part of the watch, you had to sign an oath. And it was a Christian oath. And they advocated for changing this. That's why when you become a judge or police officer or anything else and you take an oath, it's not a Christian oath. It's just an oath to your country. We are also very proud that there have been lots of leaders throughout American history, right? Two of whom you may be familiar with, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away very recently, who was the first Jewish woman on the Supreme Court, as well as Louis Brandeis. And what is important to note is that there were quotas for a very long time in United States universities, which prevented Jews from entering some of the most elite colleges and universities. And not just that, but think about the fact that there were also challenges for women in universities. How much more important is it and valued is it that Brandeis and Ginsburg became Supreme Court justices? There are also two other images I'd like to point out here, one of which is the story of Jewish chaplains. The first Jewish chaplains in the American military started during the Civil War. But this image is from World War II, and it is an iconic stamp that represents the history of the 4 chaplains. You may raise your hand if you've heard this story before. Anyone heard about the 4 chaplains? No, okay. So during World War II, you have lots of U-boats, right? And bombings that are happening. And these 4 chaplains were naval chaplains. And there were 2 Protestant chaplains, a Catholic chaplain, and a rabbi. And they were on this ship that was bombed, and it was going down. And they gave up their life vests to save the rest of the naval officers on the ship, and they went down with the ship. So this is a piece of, right, World War II history that if you're a history teacher, it's good to know, right? It represents lots of different people. Finally, in this image, you see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And when we think about Martin Luther King, we don't often think about the impact that Jews had in advocating for civil rights, but that definitely was the case. Not everyone, but there were a number of rabbis who were actually arrested alongside King, and Abraham Joshua Heschel marched for a very long time throughout the civil rights movement. And here he is carrying a Torah. So this is sort of like a peak image of the impact, right, from a civic perspective that Jews have had on American culture. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other element is then you have subsequent immigrations to America. So first you have Sephardic Jews in the 17th century, and then in the 19th century, you have immigrants from mostly Germany and Prussia, and this is around 1848. And then you get what we know today of Eastern European Jews. When we think of Jewish culture today, that's really what we often think of. And I promise you we'll get to bagels and lox and babka. But till then, here are a few things. So when we think of New York Jews, we think of the Lower East Side. And it's not just bagels and lox. They too, just like other immigrant communities, were fighting for their rights and created their own enclaves. So in the Lower East Side, you could see shops that had Yiddish, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, as well as, right, separate butchers for kosher butcher shops and bakeries and things like that. But Eastern European immigrants were a huge source of labor in New York at the time. And one of the things that you may teach about or probably have heard about is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And that incident, right, promoted changes in labor across the country and has shaped our labor laws today, right? Why do we have fire escapes and things like that in buildings? And the majority of the women in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were Jewish women. So this shows the impact that the Jewish community has had on social changes and the importance of labor laws. Another thing you'll see at the very bottom here is the Hebrew Sheltering Aid Immigrant and Aid Society of America, HIAS. So some of you may have heard of HIAS. It still helps immigrants today and was extremely important. Basically, the German Jewish immigrants sort of stepped up and said, we are going to help the next group, even if we don't necessarily like them and think they're the best. We are going to help them transition into American society. And the HIAS still helps immigrants today. This picture in the middle is the Ford International Weekly, the Dearborn Independent. And the title says, "The International Jew, the World's Problem." So many of you may not know that Ford was an anti-Semite. Yes, and he propagated lots of anti-Semitic words and articles that raised up levels of anti-Semitism in America to a peak point in the 19 teens, which actually at some point, a Jew was lynched in Georgia. You may not know about that. And so anti-Semitism has always existed, is a historical systemic problem, and it faces Jews today, but also this is a historical artifact of that. So if you are teaching on anti-Semitism in America, or just hatred of minorities in America and xenophobia, this is something you can turn to. Next slide, please. All right, this is the fun part. Okay, so in New York, you have Yiddish. It's a very big and important language, and most of us have probably heard of some of these words. So, schlep. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the word schlep. Okay, thank you. All right, who wants to give me a definition for the word schlep? Yeah. To carry, you schlep something. All right. Okay, Shmear. Who knows what a Shmear is? Raise your hand if you've heard of Shmear. All right, I'm just gonna call on someone. Man in blue. Yes. Yes. Cream cheese. It is a schmear of cream cheese. Beautiful. Spilkes. Who here has some spilkes? Does anybody know what spilkes is? Oh, yeah. Oh, you're Jewish. Okay, you're cheating. Okay. So it's okay. So spilkes is like you're a little antsy. You got like ants in your pants. Gotta go do something. Okay, spilkes. All right. Oi. Oi. All right. Yes. Okay. It's an expression of annoyance or, oh my God. Okay. Kosher. I hope you've heard of the word kosher before, but now in American parlance, you could say, I think that's kosher, which could just mean that it's good. Lox. Yes. Everybody's heard of lox. Salmon. Very good. Schmuck. Yeah. Got lots. I hope you're not lots of schmucks, but yes, we do know what a schmuck is. And l'chaim, to life. So all of these words are from Yiddish or Hebrew and are actually in common American parlance. So if you look in the dictionary, you can actually find some of these. But Yiddish was popularized in America by Yiddish newspapers. And the Vorwort, that sounds German, doesn't it? Was the biggest Yiddish newspaper in the country and is now the Forward. So if you were interested in learning more about Jewish culture and need an article, sometimes you can look up something at the Forward. All right, next slide, please. All right, popular culture. We have a lot of this. So one of the things that I think is so fascinating is that the very first talking picture, singing picture, the jazz singer, is actually a Jewish story and is acted out by Al Jolson, who was Jewish. And we have all of these other important cultural and popular media things that we've seen or experienced. Superman, you may or may not know, was written and created by two Jewish men who were the children of Eastern European immigrants. Three Stooges, very Jewish. You also have Fiddler on the Roof, right? In terms of the modern understanding of Eastern European Jewish experience, we think of Fiddler on the Roof. It is not 100% accurate, but does come from a Yiddish writer and playwright, Barbara Streisand, who becomes very famous in the 50s and the 60s, I guess, for her acting and for being a proud Jewish actress in a time where most Jews actually hid their last names, changed their last names. One of the things that I'd like to point to is Leonard Nimoy, who passed away a number of years ago, but you'll see his hands like this. That's, we know, live long and prosper, but actually comes from the priestly blessing in Judaism. So that's another sort of point of importance. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, fun show, take a watch. And we have Rashida Jones here. So when we think of Jews today, not just in the 50s or in the early 19th century, most of the time we think of Ashkenazi Jews, Jews who look like me. But as we read in the Pew study, which just came out just a little while ago, the Jewish community is actually more diverse than ever before. So there are more Jews who have maybe one parent who is Black and one parent who is Jewish, both parents who are African American, but born Jews. And one of the things that I encourage you to do as teachers is to not presume that just because a child is a different color, that they may in fact actually be Jewish, and that is 100% their tradition and their beliefs, and to make sure that you're welcoming of them. Wonderful. Do I have one more slide? Yes, great. This is the fun part. Jewish food. So very, very influenced by New York Jews, Zabar's, Katz Delicatessen, deli, babka, bagels, black and white cookies. I grew up in Louisiana, so this was actually not my food growing up, but it is still very, very typical. It's important to note that Jews have acculturated and taken on other foods. So there's a place in New Orleans called Kosher Cajun, which has kosher jambalaya and gumbo and other things like that. All of this, oh, also the Chinese food is Chinese food on Christmas. It's important for you to know that. There's not a clear definition as to why, but it tastes good and that's what we do. So all of these things are not so serious, fun, right, elements of Jewish culture, but there are other things that are important for us to consider, which our previous speakers alluded to, which is to not single out our students. So if you know that a student is Jewish, right, never asking them the answer to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They don't have an answer, and they're not representing that for you. But, right, you can always call and reach out to a rabbi, to the Jewish, to the Federation, to the JCC, to any other Jewish institution for resources on how to bring that into your classrooms. My email is public. You can send me an email. Don't worry, ask Susan, she'll give it to you. That's something that I really encourage you to do, as well as to make sure that you're bringing in multiple narratives. All Jews don't look the same. All Jews don't have the same traditions. Every year we have, right, the same challenges over when is the calendar going to start, because Rosh Hashanah is very often the very beginning of the school year. So be aware of those things if your students have to take off. I know there's been lots of conversations about calendaring, but that's really important. And just to know, right, approximately when Hanukkah is, because that's a part of our tradition, something that is joyful, and just generally to be sensitive to reach out and to speak to other people about cultural competence in the classroom. The other piece is the Holocaust, and making sure that when you teach the Holocaust, you do it with sensitivity and acknowledgement. I know that there are many resources for you to access as teachers, but recognizing that our kids are getting further and further away from the Holocaust, but they do still have often grandparents or great-grandparents who were survivors. And that is very much a part of it. And if you know that, and if they offer that, it's possible that they may want to share their stories. Don't single them out, but it can be very powerful to ensure that they have that. So I hope you learned something. I hope this was fun. And as always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, I think we do have a few minutes for questions for all of our presenters. I was manning the Zoom, but obviously you can say I'm not now, Matt. So if you have questions in the chat on Zoom, feel free to put them in. We have people looking at them. We can bring it to a microphone also, but if anybody has questions here, you can raise your hand. Matt's got a microphone he can run to. Any questions?
You have a question? Matt, Patrick has a question.
Come on down.
Thank you. My question is for Nawa specifically. How has the response been, or more importantly, how has it been in relationship to some of the things that you guys are trying to get implemented in regards to the textbooks?
Sure, we actually have one example of where we mobilized the community to address this issue. Loudoun County had several textbooks that were underway to be adopted. And remember, and I'm sure many of you know that the industry of textbooks is not just a very pure educational industry. There are lots of funding coming from different organizations serving certain lines and politics and so forth. So in Loudoun County, for example, the county had put on display their high school textbooks for people, parents, community to see them. And someone noticed one of the textbooks where it had really not just misinformation about Palestine, the conflict with Israel, or about the Arabs and Muslims, but it also had some incitement in it in some of the phrases. So we took all the examples and went back to Loudoun County and presented in different, not just us now, but others, presented the case, and they withdrew the books and came back with others, but they're still not perfect. So I think that a lot of people are not aware. Like you saw my example, it's very just one sentence. Teachers usually don't really go through sentence by sentence, but minimizing the Arab American history, the politics, everything in one chapter with pictures of, specifically pictures of people like who are extremists is not what we're looking for. So I think working with the different counties has been showing some promise in terms of really taking a closer look. And I think this is part of Virginia's effort to look at the marginalized. And we keep saying we're not just the marginalized and the invisible, we're also the misrepresented, which is really, outrageous for what's happening, but that's not your question. Thank you.
Matt's got another question over there.
Yeah, this is a question for Feed It Forward. We at George Mason are an IB school where our students are involved in community outreach as well as service learning. How could we best work in partnership with your organization? Actually, this would stand for all three presentations, but I think for yours in particular. Thanks.
Well, you can reach out to me directly, but also our events, obviously we're very heavily on social media. We can always cater an event just to your community, like your students, and also depending, like if there is a cause that you feel really strongly about, we can always do an event around that, which we always encourage because that helps other people learn about what the cause is. And so, yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. Also, feeditforwarddc.org, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, all that.
Any other questions? Kish, are there any in the chat or no? Okay. All right. Well, we'll just move on. Thank you so much for all of you for coming and taking time out of your days to be here with us. And I think that one thing that came across from all three of the presentations today is that representation matters, right? It's our job to see how we interact with our peers, how we interact with our students, what kind of materials we're providing for students. And the example of how Arabs are portrayed in a current textbook is a very clear, concrete example of the types of things that maybe we're not being as critically aware of as we could be. So when we're using materials like that, and now we have a more critical lens of how are we portraying Arab Americans or Jewish Americans or Asian Americans or Black Americans or women or anyone, are we portraying them in a way that's true and just and doesn't alienate your peers or your students. So thank you so much for that messaging and providing that for us and just being with us today. Team FCCPS, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us, for breaking bread with us across the division. Our history matters. All of our histories matter. And we want everybody in FCCPS, everyone, students, staff, all of us to feel like you matter as a part of this division. We're constantly looking to grow our History Matters work. This isn't something we're just doing this year. It's going to continue, and we want it to grow. And so, I identified several incredible people who have helped, Mary Beth Conley and many students and student organizations and community members helped for Women's History Month. And, these things don't happen on their own, and they don't happen just with me. It has to be all of us. So if you're interested in being a part of Our History Matters and helping with any of the month celebrations, please, please, please reach out. I'm literally begging you to please reach out and be a part of this because it's all of us. Next month is Pride. I want it to be amazing. I want it to be a great way to end our school year. So if you're interested, please reach out and let's have an amazing Pride celebration for June. And then September, we'll pick up back up with Hispanic Heritage Month. So please reach out and be a part of Our History Matters because you all matter and we want you to feel and live a mattered life. So thank you very much. And I hope you had a great day.